There's a town called Don't You Worry, on the banks of River Smile, where they cheer up and be happy, blossom sweetly all the while, where the never grumble flower blooms beside the fragrant tree, and the ne'er give up and patience point their faces to the sky. In the valley of contentment, in the province of I will, you will find this lovely city at the foot of no fret hill. There are thoroughfares delightful in this very charming town, and on every hand are shade trees named the very seldom frown. Rustic benches quite enticing, you'll find scattered here and there, and to each a vine is clinging, called the frequent earnest prayer. Everybody there is happy and is singing all the while, in the town of Don't You Worry, on the banks of River Smile. On the banks of River Smile. On the banks of River Smile.
Hi, welcome to Storytime in the Cabin. I'm Brian. Glad you can join me again for some more stories. Today I'm going to read The King's Page, The Road to the Castle, The Torch of Courage, The Year, and The Queer Little Mouse. So get yourself comfortable and we'll get started in just a minute. Let's get started. King's Page. There once was a little boy who wished to be a page in the castle of the king. He lived in a tiny house at the foot of a hill, and at the tip top of the hill stood the castle, shining bright in the sun with many sparkling towers and minarets. Once a day, the great gates of the castle grounds opened wide, and out came the king and all his men, riding down the hill and past the little boy's house and on to the woods to hunt. Oh, but the sight was wonderful. White horses pranced by with all the trappings of the king's colors. The king rode ahead, dressed in his bright hunting costume, and followed by all his retainers. There were little page boys, too, manly and straight, as they walked at the end of the procession in their velvet doublets and wearing feathers in their caps. I want to be a page. I want to walk behind the king, said the boy every day when the king went by. And one day, his chance came. It's got to be pretty exciting for him to have the king come by his house every day. Most people spend their whole life trying to see the king, and he gets to see the king every day. He comes to his house, so it's pretty exciting for him. "Come with me," said the messenger who waited at the doorway of the little boy's house. "You are needed at the castle." So the little boy kissed his mother goodbye and climbed up the hill with the messenger. He was quite happy, and all the way his joyful heart beat time to the tramp, tramp, tramp of his stout leather shoes. As he walked along, he said to himself, "I shall see the king's gold throne. I shall eat my supper from a bowl of silver. I shall wear a cloak and have a feather in my cap." But when they came to the top of the hill, the boy felt, as he looked down, that he was a long way from home. It can be scary being away from home, especially for the first time. It takes a brave person to stay away from home. I remember when I stayed at my friend's house just across the way, I could even see my house from the window, that I was afraid, especially at night when it was time to go to bed. I just wanted to be home. So he's probably feeling a little bit like that right now when he looks back and realizes that he's away from home for a while. He was surprised, too, to see how dark and gloomy the old castle looked. Instead of going straight to the throne room, he was taken through long stone passages to the kitchen, a great busy room. Here, the messenger left him. "Where is my sword?" the little boy asked. And the king's cook, laughing, put a wooden ladle in his hand and told him to stir the soup in the great broth pot. "I want to sit at the foot of the king's throne," begged the little boy. But one of the maids showed him a rough wooden bench with no back where he was to sit and polish copper pots after the soup was finished. "Where is my velvet cloak?" he questioned at last. And at that, all the scullery boys in the kitchen laughed, and they tied a big coarse apron on him. "This is your new uniform now." Wow, it must have been a little bit shocking and disappointing for him to find out that he was actually needed in the kitchen as a helper to the cook, cleaning and doing stuff like that. He thought he was being taken right to the king's throne and be somebody important right away. But the little boy was not used to crying when things went wrong, so he began to work as hard as he could in the king's kitchen. It was not such a bad place after all, always warm and cheerful, with the delicious smells of roasting meats, savory sauces, and spiced puddings. Sounds good. Actually, I never had spiced pudding, so I'm not sure if that's good or not, but the roasting meats and the savory sauces sounds real good. Everyone had something to do every minute of the time, and whether it was sweeping or cutting up vegetables, everybody did it well. I was thinking when I was reading this that most people really don't think that the small jobs are that important. Everybody wants to do the big job. I think that's the most important part. But, if you think of a clock and you think of all the really tiny moving parts that are inside of a clock, the really, really small ones, sometimes they're even hard to see. If one of those parts break, the whole clock doesn't function properly. So you need to remember that do those little small jobs really good so that the larger scale can work. The little boy listened and decided to learn how to be a good kitchen helper. So he searched the woods and fields for the rare herbs that helped to make the king's broth tasty, and he stirred the broth so hard that it was more perfectly blended than ever before. He sat on his hard wooden bench and polished the copper pots until they caught the sunshine. And he sang at his work like a brown thrush all day long. And so, in working, he forgot to wish for a sword, a velvet cloak, and a feather. After the boy has been the helper in the king's kitchen for many months, the big door opened one morning. There stood the same messenger who had called on him at his house. "The king wishes to see the page who sings at his work," said the messenger. "Come." And he reached out his hand to the little boy. "But I am not a page yet. I have not learned to be a page," he said. "You have been learning to serve the king here in the kitchen." And the messenger beckoned to the little boy to follow him. "A boy who can serve a cook can serve a king," said the messenger. So the little boy's wish came true. He became a page and carried a sword and wore a green velvet cloak and had a feather in his cap. And every day he walked in the procession just behind the king. He became a page only because he had a good attitude. He was disappointed about working in the kitchen when he first got to the castle, probably still feeling a little homesick and sad, and he wasn't able to do the thing he wanted to do. But he decided to just have a good attitude and do his best and put his heart into his work and be the best helper that he could be. And because of that, he became a really good helper, and the king noticed him and wanted the boy to be in his procession with him because he only wants the best. And if the boy would have cried and maybe been angry or pouted, refused to work, he would have either been sent home or he'd have been stuck doing a worse job. Like maybe cleaning out the horse stalls and shoveling the manure. But he decided to have a good attitude. And he doesn't even have to be homesick because every day the king comes by his house to go hunting. Because he's with the king, he gets to pass his house every day, so he gets wave to his mom as he goes by. And she can wave and blow kisses back and be proud of him. So it worked out good for him. All because he had a good attitude. All right. The road to the castle. No one in town had ever really seen the castle. They had been told about it by their grandfathers and grandmothers in whispers as they sat around the fireplaces in their homes. It lies very near this town, within easy walking distance, they said. You could reach it by going straight to the east if you could find the road. No one lives in the castle, and its gates are wide open, and whoever succeeds in finding it may be the master of the castle. Wow. So, if you find the castle, then you get to live there. It's pretty cool. They also told tales of its wonders. The gardens bloom with flowers and never fade, they said. And there are chests full of gold and silver and red rubies and blue sapphires, enough to make all the poor people in this town comfortable with food and shelter and clothing. Oh, if we only might find that road that leads to the castle, they said. Well, they're not even sure the castle exists. I mean, they believe it exists, but no one's ever really seen this castle. So, we'll see. Sometimes they thought that they saw the castle in the early morning when the sun rose and set long, bright shafts of light up through the white clouds. The townspeople would peer out their upper windows and say, "See, there are the gold towers of the castle standing above its white marble walls." It's like when somebody really wants to see something bad enough, they'll see it. Could be just like those shapes the clouds make. You know, when you're summertime and you look up at the blue sky and the white puffy clouds are there, and you say, "Ooh, look at that cloud. It looks like a butterfly," or "Ooh, that cloud looks like a horse." So them clouds might be looking like a castle to them because they want to see this castle so bad. And when it was evening and the sun set in bright colors, orange and violet and rose and gold, the townspeople would again watch the sky and whisper to one another, "We see the gardens of the castle, full of fruit trees and violets and red and yellow roses." Many people tried every year to find the road that led to the castle. There was a knight who started out boldly one morning, going toward the east and cutting down with his sword all the little animals of the woods. It's not good. Who ran across his path. He came running back in short time with his sword broken and his eyes full of terror. He said that he had encountered wild beasts and had found no road. Seems to me that that knight was the wild beast in the forest, cutting down things in his path. You know, we need to be nice in the forest. That's where the animals live. That's their home. That's where, you know, the insects live and plants. So we got to be careful when we go into the woods to make sure we don't hurt anything. There was a rich man who started out on the same quest because he wished to have more wealth than he already had. He had gone only a mile when a great tree fell and completely blocked his path. He came back without finding the road to the castle. It's a good thing the rich man didn't find the castle, because whoever finds it gets to keep the jewels, and he wouldn't have shared it with the poor townspeople. So he's already rich, and he's not helping anybody out with his money. So what would be different? He'd probably find the jewels and just keep it to himself. So there were other people who searched for the road, people of importance who wanted to be decorated with medals for finding the castle, people who wished to be called master instead of just mister. They always came back with the news that they had been stopped by a prickly hedge or a roaring dragon or by something else as troublesome. You're probably making them stories up about the roaring dragon and the beasts and the hedges because they're embarrassed that they couldn't find the castle road. You know, these men are all have a lot of pride, so they don't want to come back and say, "I couldn't find it." So they had to make up stories. So they had an excuse. That's usually what men of pride do. Hans was a little boy of the lady who did the washing for the townspeople. He was a merry little boy, but because he spent most of his time carrying baskets of linen, and because he wore poor clothes, the children of the town did not play with him, and he was very often lonely. That's not nice of them not to play with him because he has poor clothes. He seemed like he'd be a good friend to somebody. He was a merry little boy. When he had no baskets of linen to fetch and carry, he used to take long walks in the woods alone, making friends of the trees and the birds. One day, he had gone quite far into the woods because he had found many pleasant things to do on the way. He had lifted a very heavy stone that was keeping a little tree from growing straight and tall. He had broken a trap that a cruel person had set to snare little rabbits. He had lifted the woodcutter's baby over a narrow place in the brook that she might find her father. He had gathered twigs and put them in a pile at the foot of the tree that the thrush might find them for her nest building. That's how you act in the woods. If you need an example, use Hans for an example. Not the knight, because he's a bad example. But you can use Hans, he's a good example. Okay. As he went on, he came to a mossy path that twisted and turned and went a long way. In following it, Hans was very careful not to step on the earthworms that wiggled across it, or the busy ants building their sand houses, or the little plants that grew beside the path. And as he walked carefully along the green path, Hans suddenly smelled the most wonderful fragrance. It was like all the roses and all the violets and all the lilies they had ever seen crowded into one delicious scent. I must find that garden and pick some flowers for my mother, Hans said, running ahead. Just around the turn in the path, he stopped, and his eyes were almost blinded with the brightness, and he was dizzy with the sweetness. There, in front of Hans, was the castle, white and gold and large and beautiful. Guess it does exist. Its gates were wide open, and beyond was the glorious garden full of flowers that would not fade. No one was inside, and Hans went in through the garden, picking armfuls of roses and finding the chest of jewels that were his now. No one could understand how Hans had found the road, but when he came home in the evening with his pockets full of jewels to give to the poor, and took his mother back to live with him in the castle, they decided it must be true. You know, it seems like that castle and the woods surrounding the castle was a little bit enchanted. It was like stopping people from finding it. And in order to be able to find it, it required simple acts of kindness and caring towards others. Not just people, but caring towards all things that you come into contact with. The others who searched for the castle were very selfish, and therefore they came back defeated, empty-handed, and nothing really to show for their journey. But Hans found it, and he was a good boy, and he shared the jewels with everybody. So now he gets to live in the castle. Now I'm going to give you a chance to read, if you would like. Mary Had a Little Lamb, and I'll give you a few minutes to read that if you want, and then I'll come back and I'll read it aloud with you. Mary had a little lamb. Mary had a little lamb. Its fleece was white as snow. Everywhere that Mary went, the lamb was sure to go. It followed her to school one day, which was against the rules. It made the children laugh and play to see the lamb at school. Now we're going to read the Torch of Courage. Get a drink real quick. That feels so good going down. Keeps my chest nice and warm. It's warming up in here pretty good today. So didn't have a problem with leaving the fire out while I was outside working. I kept it going in here, so it's a little nicer. Still chilly. It's always kind of chilly in here. It's never really hot, but it's a lot more comfortable now. So, the Torch of Courage. It was midwinter. Peter knelt down on the old cold stone floor and blew the fire. No use. It would not burn, for there was little left of it save a few gray, dull embers and a bed of ashes. He looked at the couch in the corner of the room where his mother lay, covered with some skins that his father had brought home in the days when he was the mightiest hunter of the whole country round. There was nothing left of all that glory now except these skins and the boy's pluck to overcome hardships. His mother shivered and tossed, for she was cold and ill. "This fire must burn," Peter said. "I must fetch some coals from a neighbor's fire." He opened the door, slipped through, and then closed it quickly behind him. He drew back a moment in the icy gale that struck him as soon as he faced the forest. The trees rattled as their icicles clashed together. They did not break, for they were as hard as crystal. He lost his breath for a moment as he plunged into the path that led to the woods. That's pretty cold. You know, it gets cold around here. It's pretty cold around here, but not that cold. His icicles were as hard as crystals, and he could barely even breathe. So it's kind of like being on the moon. Like I've never really been on the moon, but they tell me it's pretty cold. It was a bitter night for even a strong woodsman to be out, and Peter was only a lad of 12. The path was a glare of ice. Once Peter lost his foothold and plunged into a mass of frozen underbrush, its ice-sharpened edges cutting his hands and his face. He was up and on again in an instant, ready for the next hazard. He had not long to wait. A sudden squall of frozen snow and sleet met him. The cutting wind blew tiny particles of ice in his face. He's getting hit. "I shall have to go back," Peter thought. And then he caught a gleam in the dark, two shining eyes of some little wild animal, caught, as he was in the fury of the storm, but hiding bravely under a tree until the worst of it should be over, and he could be out and on his own again. And the soft note of a snowbird, nestless, the victim of the storm, but sounding its courage even now in the nighttime, met the boy's ears. "Keep on, don't give up," the animal and the bird seemed to be urging Peter, even the cutting lash of the wind, singing a death song as it struck and stung him, put the power to fight into Peter. On, if you'd escape me," was the call of the storm. That's the only way to escape a storm, is to keep going on, keep going forward till you get out of it. Peter went on, dazed, shaking, through the mile of the path to the next hut in the forest. Scarcely able to knock, he threw himself against the door. He barely made that trip. That was a long walk, though. He had to walk a mile in that terrible storm. And that's quite a distance for a boy of 12 to go through that kind of experience. Lucky he made it. But he loves his mother, and he wants to make sure he gets a fire going for her so she can start to get well again. She's sick and cold. A light for our fire? It's almost out, and my mother needs its warmth or she will die, Peter told the man who opened the door and led him into a room whose heat made him feel suddenly weak and faint. The man pointed to a seat in the chimney corner. You can never make your way home with a torch through the storm, he said. I will light you a large one of my hardest pitch, but you'll never make the trip back before it burns out. Oh, but let me try, Peter cried, getting up and going over to the window. Already the wind is dying down, he said. Only light me the pitch, and I will get it home. There was a pot of broth over the fire, and the wife of the house gave Peter a steaming bowl of it. Then the torch was lighted, and Peter took it carefully in his hand. There was but a spark ablaze on its end, for it would not do to waste the fire on the way. It must be carried with the utmost care, not so quickly as to burn it out, or so slowly that it would die. Holding it as close to his heart as he dared, Peter started out. So he was probably doing, one of these numbers where he was like trying to keep it. You got to keep it lit, so it's got to have some air, or burn out. If you close it too tight, it'll burn out. But if the wind hits it too hard, then it's going to burn fast, and then it'll burn out and get blown out. So he's got to make it all the way home again for that whole mile. So he's probably going to have to do something like you're saying here, where he's got it close to his heart, protecting it somewhat, so he can make it home. It's going to be tricky. It's going to be tricky. The storm was less furious now, but the clear, still cold made the boy sleepy. When he came to the spot where he had heard the call of the snowbird, its note seemed far away and dreamy to him, although it was really close. I will sit down on the soft bank of snow and rest a while. I will go to sleep. It's never a good idea. I don't care how tired, or how wore out, or how cold you are. If you're outside in the cold, you don't go to sleep. You gotta keep going until you get out of the cold, or you could freeze. His eyes half shut, he stumbled toward the bank, but all at once he was wide awake again. The spark on the end of the torch shone full in his eyes and burned the light of courage into his heart. Every muscle tense, and his head up, the boy struggled on. Almost before he knew it, and with the torch now blazing bravely, he was at home. Wow, the torch seems kind of magical there. It kind of woke him up and gave him that strength to get up and get home. A light for a poor fire, Mother, he said. If only these old embers were fresh logs and pine knots, what a blaze we would have. But snow covers all the forest wood. My brave boy, his mother cried, raising herself to look at Peter as he bent over the fire. It was indeed a hopeless-looking heap of ashes, with only some charred ends left of logs burned long ago. But as the torch touched it, the ashes, in a magical way, turned to live coal from the embers into blazing logs. Their heat touched the boy and his mother with a kind of comfort that was like food and drink and prosperity. And the light from the fire filled the room with a soft radiance that was different from any fire they had ever seen before. They could not speak, feeling and seeing its wonder. Wow, I got a nice fire going here, but it's not give me that experience. because I didn't touch it up with a magic torch. I just lit it with a regular match. Gotta remember that next time. Magic torch. Peter's mother rose and sat down beside him on the bench in the corner. I feel much better, she said. In the morning I should be up and at my lace making again. We will not dread the winter any more, my son. No matter what comes, I feel now as if we will be able to make it. Yes, the boy answered, but his eyes were looking far away. It was a strange torch. I doubt if any other would have kept lighted on such a night as this. And I wonder how I was able to get it home through the freezing cold. Even in the morning, the fire was still burning and the house was warm and comfortable. Stranger still, the broth pot, which had almost been empty, bubbled up brimming until it was ready to spill. So they even had their soup pot get refilled while they were sleeping. Fire stayed lit, the soup pot got filled, and jealous. Day after day, the fire the torch had lighted in their homes burned with a bright, steady blaze that kept Peter and his mother warm and comfortable. Day after day, it kept the broth pot boiling full. One night, Peter stuck a bit of pitch in the great fire that burned in their hearth. He made a blazing torch. Peter then went to each of the villagers' home and touched their coals with his special flame that burned from his torch. And over their warm fires in the winter, the villagers loved to tell the tale of the torch, how it magically kept their fires lit, offering them warmth and comfort year after year. Where did it come from? They asked themselves, and then they shake their heads. But the magic torch was lighted very close to their hearthstones. The sparks started in the storm and cold of the night by a boy with his great courage. So as many a torch of courage started on its glorious way, blazing more and more brightly as it reaches from hand to hand until it finds a place among the stars. You know, the act of courage almost inspires everyone. So by being brave, you light the way for others to be brave. Therefore, they can feel comfortable instead of being afraid all the time. Now I'm going to read a little poem called The Year. It's a poem about the months of the year and some of the things that we enjoy from each of those months. So this is more about really enjoying the pictures and as I read. So okay. January brings the snow, makes our feet and fingers glow. February brings the rain, thaws the frozen lakes again. March brings breezes loud and shrill, stirs the dancing daffodil. April brings the primrose sweet, scatters daisies at our feet. May brings flocks of pretty lambs, skipping by their fleecy dams. June brings tulips, lilies, and roses, fills the children's hands with posies. Hot July brings cooling showers, apricots, and gillyflowers. August brings the sheaves of corn, then the harvest time is born. Warm September brings the fruit. Sportsmen then begin to shoot. Fresh October brings the pheasant, then to gather nuts is pleasant. Dull October brings the blast, then the leaves are whirling fast. Chill December brings the sleet, blazing fire and Christmas tree. Thought that was a nice poem to share. Simple but nice. Okay, now I'm going to read a fun poem called The Queer Little Mouse. Oh, I'll tell you a story that nobody knows, of 10 little fingers and 10 little toes, of 2 pretty eyes and 1 little nose, and where they all went one day. Oh, the little round nose smelled something sweet, so sweet it must surely be nice to eat, and patter away went 2 little feet out of the room one day. 10 little toes climbed up on a chair. 2 eyes peeped over a big shelf where lay a plate of cookies all frosted and fair, made by Mama that day. The mouth grew round and the eyes grew big at the taste of the sugar, the spice, the fig, and 10 little fingers went dig, dig, dig into the cookies that day. And when Mama kissed the curly head, cuddling it cozily up in bed, I wonder, was there a mouse, she said, out on the shelf today? Oh, Mama, yes, and a laugh of glee like fairy bells rang merrily. But the little bit of mouse was me, out on the shelf that day. You always think you're getting away with sneaking cookies, or a piece of the cake, but you get caught and you don't really care. I mean, you're doing it, you're like, I'm gonna get caught, but I don't think it's worth it because it tastes so good. So I remember when I was a kid, we had to try to steal some candy. We tried to take some candy out of my grandmother's candy dish. And we were trying to, it was glass, so we had to remove the glass lid without banging it on the side because you hear it. And we thought, okay, we got to jerk it really fast, see if we can get that lid off of there quick enough. In fact, I think I have I do. I have the same exact candy jar right here. So this is the one. Okay. And so it was on the table, and everybody's visiting, and us kids are in the living room. They're visiting in the kitchen. You hear them laughing and stuff. So we had to wait for them to start laughing, and then we try to get the lid off of really quick. So basically, let's see if I can do it. It's hard to do it here. Let me see if I can do it. So if I make noise, I'm caught, and then parents know I'm trying to take this candy. So let's see. I haven't done this in a long time. Oh, I'm busted. See? That's not easy. And then the hard part is trying to get it back. Trying to get it back on there after you get the candy. It ain't over yet. And you gotta really get... Seems like I'm better off at putting it back. So, anyway, thought that was a fun story to share. Kids, try anything to get that candy or cookie or cake. Hopefully I didn't burn my time up. Let me see what kind of time I have left. Because if I have a little bit of time, then I'm going to read a little bit more. Looks like we may better get away with it. This is another fun poem. It's called Popping Corn. Another fun memory when I was a kid, but I guess I'll tell you that another time. This isn't about reminiscence, it's about reading stories. Pippity pop, the redder the fire, the faster they hop. Now here, now there, now up, now down, now spinning around. Pippity pop, the redder the fire, the faster they pop. Silent a moment, then off in a flurry, pippity pop, and hurry scurry. Pippity pop, the redder the fire, the faster they hop. Silent a moment, then hopping and popping, jerking and dropping, forever a dancing with hippity hop. So now you're never going to be able to make popcorn again without thinking of that poem. Makes you want popcorn, actually. Something bad about reading about cakes and popcorn. You should start wanting some of it. Okay, this one is going to be the last one for the night. But I'm not going to tell you who it's about. I'm just going to read the poem, see if you can guess who it's about. And afterwards, I'll tell you who it is, and then I'll read it again. So you can now that you know who it is. I know a giant, no bigger than a pin, but he can make the strongest man wrap a scarf around his chin. To tweak the nose and pinch the toes and fill one full of woes are jokes the midget loves to play alike on foe and friend. He can shape the dripping eavesdrops into a crystal spear and clutch the falling rain so hard 'twill turn it all white with fear. He can chain the dashing river and plug the running spout. He can build a wall upon the lake and shut the water out. But watch this little giant run when he looks out and sees the bright shining sun. So, give you a little bit of time to guess who that is. The answer is Jack Frost. So now that we know who it is, I'm sure most of you got it. I know a little giant, no bigger than a pin, but he can make the strongest man wrap a scarf around his chin. To tweak the nose and pinch the toes and fill one full of woes are jokes the midget loves to play alike on friend and foe. He can shape the dripping eavesdrops into crystal spears and clutch the falling rain so hard 'twill turn all white with fear. He can change the dashing river and plug the running spout. He can build a wall upon the lake and shut the water out. But watch this little giant run when he looks out and sees the shining sun. Jack Frost doesn't like the warm sun. He likes it when it's cold. Jack Frost probably would have been responsible for making that little pine stuff there turn white with snow. But he's not in here right now because we have a nice cozy fire. It's too warm for him in here. So that's how you keep Jack Frost away. Okay, well, that's it for today. Sweet dreams and fairy trees. I had a good time again. And see you next time.